There she is, the almost birthday girl. Oh, but it seems I wore my long legs today. What happens if I...
Hello, and welcome to a new Duo-Divergent video. This video is about Longlegs, the film, and me and Sam watched this at the weekend. So I'm just going to hand over to Sam to talk a little bit about the production of the film, because he usually knows more about that stuff, and then we'll get into talking about it.
Lovely, thank you. And if I remember correctly, this will probably be the most recent film that we've, or anything really, that we've talked about on the channel so far, because it came out in this year, whereas most things that we've talked about tended to come out quite a few years after before we talked about them. So Longlegs was announced first announced in November 2022, and it was cited that it was going to draw inspiration from various sources, including a killing that took place in the 1990s of Joe Bernat. I don't know entirely how you spell it. How you pronounce it is French. Ramsey, who was a child beauty pageant star, who, just get it up on my phone, was basically killed in the mid 1990s, and she was killed on her birthday, which was near Christmas time, and her parents had, for her birthday, we're going to give her a life-size doll of herself. Yeah. So you can see where this is going to allude to in the film. Yeah. And to this day, the killing is a cold case because no one's been found guilty of it, or they've not managed to find anyone who they believe would have done it.
Yeah.
And so that obviously has a very big influence on it as a film. And then the actual budget for filming the film is relatively small. For modern day films, it was only $10 million US, and then, as is generally quite normal, it had another 10 million for its marketing, which is generally normal in industry costing, is that you generally put the same amount as you have into making the film as to marketing it, regardless of how costly it has been. Generally, even if it's cost 200 million, you'll then have another 200 million in promoting it. And overall, at least from how it's gone in the months since it was released, it actually appears to perform quite well in that it's taken over 100 million. So that's
5 times the amount.
5 times as much. Yeah. So if you were invested in it as a film, you probably made a quite smart decision there.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's quite a low budget, especially considering the main character as such, or one of the main characters is Nicolas Cage, which you'd expect his fee to be quite a big chunk of that.
Yeah. And that leads on to another interesting part of the production, which he, after it was announced, so a couple of months later, when he was casting the film, he also took on a producing role in the film as well.
Right, okay.
So he's also credited as a producer in it, because he has his own production company, like a lot of very well-known actors do these days.
It does seem like it's probably a film that, had it not been pushed by certain people, probably wouldn't have got to where it got to. So I think the idea of it's great.
Yeah.
But I think it'd have been quite a hard sell without having that intrigue of it being Nicolas Cage doing this quite quirky character. Quirky. I mean, that's not really the right word for Longlegs, but
and another thing that's interesting with it, even before we get onto the film itself, is that it's had a really weird marketing campaign around it where it didn't really emphasise that much in terms of traditional advertising. A lot of it was really weird things. Like there was a number you could call and you'd have Longlegs answer, things like that. And a lot of, and apparently the distributor, which was Neon, when in the aftermath of I filmed it all and whatnot, when they were they asked the director who directed and wrote it, which is Osgood Perkins, which we'll circle back to because that might lead into something later on. And they asked him if they could just go completely wild with the advertising and marketing it all. He said, yeah, just go for it. And so a lot of the marketing campaign was seen as very unorthodox for a film.
Yeah.
And so I think really completes most of its production history. Last thing to say is that it, for a film that came out in 2024, and for a film of its scale, it actually probably came out fairly late after the principal photography was done, because that was done in January and February of 2023, and obviously if it only came out in like mid 2024, that's over a year having gone through post-production and then actually been released.
Yeah.
And so that's the final thing to say from a production standpoint.
So if we go into sort of our overall thoughts of the film, and then maybe talk about what we feel the symbolisation of it and that type of thing is, and how it felt while we were watching it, and also what research we've kind of done since, and how that may have changed our view on what it may have meant. I'll go first on it. So my thoughts are, it's a really good film. It was very interesting and made me, the whole way through it, I was kind of going, oh really? Oh, I wasn't expecting that, and I wasn't expecting that, because I really hadn't done a lot of looking into it prior to watching it. I'd heard a lot of good things, and I'd seen that the reviews were relatively good for it, and I'd obviously seen what Longlegs looked like, so I was intrigued by that. But I wasn't really aware of the fact that it kind of went down the supernatural side of things, so I wasn't certain on whether it was supernatural or not. So it's quite interesting as the supernatural bits came in to it, how that sort of came as a bit of a shock to me, I suppose.
Yeah. And with me, like with you, I really liked it and didn't really know that much about it beforehand, other than I knew that it was about the hunt for a serial killer, and I knew that it had been cited as being very close to films like Silence of the Lambs, Seven, and Zodiac, and to a certain degree Mindhunter, which is a Mindhunter. There's a Mindhunter, that's a completely different thing, which is a series that was all about the development of psychological profiling of serial killers.
Yeah.
And whatnot. And so I knew that I'd heard about it having those as reference points to it, and so did, like you didn't really anticipate the supernatural elements, which I thought in the end actually works with it rather well, given that it's a lot of it is all about Satanism and cult thought processes, and there's references to all kind of things from the Book of Revelation to T-Rex.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew it was kind of probably going to go down a cult aspect, but I didn't expect it to go quite down the rabbit hole as far as it did, and being so out there with it. I thought it might be a little bit more sort of Zodiac killer-ish in that kind of way of being, rather than it being very clearly that it had supernatural elements in it. I thought it would maybe touch on them as a possibility rather than being an absolute. Which I suppose came as a bit of a shock, but it was great to see. Yeah,
because one of the things that struck me about the supernatural elements is how a lot of it works within a psychoanalytical framework, particularly in a lot of the conceptualizations around Jungian psychology, where with Jungian psychology there's kind of a sense of that the world is symbolic and rather than physical. Like we can see the physical world, but we interact with the world in a symbolic sense.
Yeah.
In the sense of you don't see a chair, you see a place to sit down, things like that. And so whilst I was watching it, I was very struck by this very Jungian sense of symbols being almost alive, which would make a lot of sense given that it's a film that is very much looking into Satanism and cult mentalities, which is all about symbols almost overpowering the human mind in a sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think it definitely was using symbols in various different ways throughout it and bringing them into the real world. So it was quite interesting to see how they sort of pulled all that together. And I think they've used quite a lot of different types of symbolism all together as well, which was quite interesting. It didn't feel like it had one sort of... It felt like, clearly the storyline was one clear storyline, but it felt like it was pulling inspiration from many different areas and trying to get people to definitely think about it from an individual perspective. Yeah,
because one of the things that I thought of as soon as it ended is that there's multiple different ways to interpret it, and there's a lot of allusions to various areas of both, in a sense that it's a very, to use a technical term, cine-literate film, in that it very much references back to a lot of films, both within the crime genre and the horror genre. Like, the main person who you follow, Lee Harker, has the same surname as Jonathan Harker, who is the first person that you see in Dracula.
Yeah.
And because that story, and at least the initial part of Dracula, is written in what's known as an epistolary form, which is basically where you're reading people's letters and things like that. So there's allusions both with it to actual written horror stories and also a lot more cinematic elements, which are taken more from films that are around serial killers, like we've already mentioned, with various ones. And a lot of the ones which we mentioned all happen to be films by David Fincher, who is known for films relating to serial killers a lot of the time. And of those, the one that I felt probably, to me at least, closest to was Seven, in that there's a lot of allusions to at least in that the serial killer in Seven has this very theocratic view of things, which almost bleeds out into ending between almost the supernatural and the real, in how, going back to how I was alluding to it, in a sense overpowered by the Christian mythos that John Doe in Seven is.
It is definitely pulling from different things. From my what I would say, I felt it pulled more from, on a film, from what I could see, it would be Silence of the Lambs. It was very, very similar cinematically to Silence of the Lambs, even down to being in the basement of somewhere, and a lot of the filming of you sort of seeing as Cobble is, or Longlegs is sort of doing his thing, I suppose. And creating things, that was all very similar. And when you sort of go down the doll route as well, the killer in Silence of the Lambs is doing it for the skin of the person, so that was kind of similar as well. So, and it kind of had that same police officer trying to find the person and was linked to them somehow, so differently, but it just felt very cinematically similar.
Because of all the films that were referenced in relation to it, the only one I hadn't seen was Silence of the Lambs.
It'd be interesting for you to watch Silence of the Lambs and then link those back on, but in the reverse of the way that I've done it. So from me watching Silence of the Lambs sort of 15, 20 years ago to now, whereas you'll be doing it the other way around, which would be interesting to see you you make those connections, but to Silence of the Lambs from Longlegs. So that would be quite interesting to see. But there are a lot of similarities there. But from the Dracula perspective as well, I felt it was very sort of gothic in its filming, and it had that kind of eerie gothic feel to it. So it kind of fits in with the sort of Dracula comparison there as well.
Yeah.
There was also, I mean, one of the things that was mentioned that we have kind of had a look at is the whole Faustian side of it as well, which is quite interesting, because I felt like at the end of the film, I felt like for a bit, I felt like he was Satan. And then I realised he's not, and it is more like he is a link between Satan and humanity.
Yeah, he is a demon.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a human and a demon.
The devil incarnate he is. Yeah.
So it is as if there is an element of Faustian deals going on between the mother, I think her name's Ruth, and
because was in the aftermath of viewing it, I think we've both been looking at all the different readings of it, because as we were saying at Howard's, we kind of knew that there were going to be multiple different ways of reading it.
Yeah.
And one of the ones that I came across was all about it being a reworking of Dr. Faustus.
Mm-hmm.
And the most obvious part of that is that Lee's mother is very much a Faustian character.
Yeah.
In a very different way to how Dr. Faustus is a Faustian character as well.
Yeah.
But also, an argument that I've seen is that Lee herself is a very Faustian character, in that although it's impressed onto her rather than it's a deal that she takes on, in that their aim is to kill a family, and in the end she has to partake in the killing of a family in order to protect the daughter of the family. And so she's in a untraditional Faustian way is suppose you could almost say contaminated by the Faustian mindset, in that even if she isn't embodying that mindset, she's having to do that in order to serve the child.
Yeah, and it definitely did feel like an enforced Faustian, not an enforced Faustian deal, but a thought process that was sort of put upon her through the Faustian deal her mother had with Longlegs all those years ago. Yeah,
and that reading I would classify as a very literary reading of it, because it's maybe focused on stories that have already been told, and then about how they've been reworked.
Yeah.
So that was obviously one that I came across. Were there any others that you came across that you thought were interesting readings of the film?
Yeah, so one of the things that I came across was more on the side of less supernatural symbolism. And that was around sort of childhood trauma. And how that can have a lasting effect. And I think that's very clear from the Lee perspective. And each one of them would be a childhood trauma that had happened. So if the murders hadn't have actually happened, they would have all been traumas that the child had been left with. So the ball would represent, and then this is kind of shown when when she shoots the doll of Lee, and the black smoke comes out of it. That is sort of the memories releasing themselves, and that's sort of, I suppose, therapy, the shooting, replicating therapy.
Yeah.
But the doll itself being what's left behind, and there's not this person who is struggling to deal with the situation and would seem like they are exactly the same as they were at that point, and sort of freezing in time was another thing that I read about. Sort of that the memory was frozen in time, but also that the person saw themselves still in that place. So it's so it's kind of saying that there was a possibility that that's another way that you could look at it, was that if a trauma happens to you in childhood, you're stuck there until something happens to change that. And
because that was very similar to my initial reading of it, because my initial reading of it was very much both in the was mainly in the psychological, in that the film is all about trying to basically break free from your trauma. in a sense, which is again very much alluding back to that, except because particularly when someone is traumatized in a certain way, they can quite often end up either going through into a dissociative state or just blanket repression where you don't remember it clearly because it's so horrifying that you can't, your mind just refuses to remember it properly.
Yeah.
And so,
and that's
go on.
Sorry, that's kind of touched on again when they find the doll of is it Carrie Ann Camera, the girl that's still alive, who's the other survivor, I suppose. When they find that doll and the person looking at the doll puts the sound, the ultrasound thing on that he can hear, he can hear trauma that he's had, and also Lee starts seeing those religious symbolism things again, the snakes, the triangle, all of those things. So, and kind of the pictures that she'd seen as part of her starting with the FBI, the pictures that she'd done earlier.
Because there's a bit when she goes back to a mother's house and she finds the photos, and one of the photos is of him, and then the screen suddenly sort of blurs, and it goes from that section at the beginning, which is shot differently in it. And that was another thing I liked in that how not just through the editing but also through the actual screen ratio and how that screen ratio was presented, it very clearly indicated to you that this was a memory in the past, in that it was not just in 4:3, whereas the film was in, was it 2:30 or 2:30 films? I can't remember.
2:30, it's 2:39, and it was then and then I can't remember what the other one was, but it was basically your normal screen presentation for most modern day films anyway. And then with the 4:3, it was very much shaped like an old like cathode style TV set where it's much more of a sort of rounded square. And even to the point where it looks like it's almost had like artificial crackling being put onto the film and stuff like that. Yeah, which made it much more interesting to watch as well. And like you say, it gave it clarity of what you're actually watching. So, but kind of subliminally to an extent that was happening. You might not be picking up at the time that that's happening, but it was clearly telling you without telling you that was the case.
Yeah, it's at least from a visual point of view, it's an easy way of doing it. Obviously, from a production point of view, it's not an easy way of doing it, but that's a different thing. And anyway, going on through the film towards that's where Mother basically reveals what's the deal that was made.
Yeah. And
I think we're in the framework of it being a very psychological tale that is sort of coming, like having in a sense, the mental blocks that you've put in place on your mind, those are finally lifted, and it's a case of, and then the, for all intents and purposes, show down at the house, well, at the birthday party, for all intents and purposes, then becomes a case almost like this, in a weird way of framing it, almost like this mythological battle between following your parent figures or breaking free of that and sort of establishing yourself on your own and breaking away from that trauma.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there was an element as well around parental control and how you break free of parental control as you get older. And again, if that doesn't happen, what that does to you. One of the things I've just thought about, and this has literally just come to me, is it's quite interesting that it is a religious figure. So Ruth, the mother, is a religious figure that is bringing this trauma to them, and is kind of as if like if you are thinking about it from the trauma perspective, there is maybe a bit of a religious undertone to how the church can bring trauma, whether that's actual true trauma or through religious indoctrination, that it could, because they're bringing a gift, she's bringing a gift to them, and is it that gift is in itself, religion, and then and then the trauma that's associated to that is then put into the doll. So
Yeah.
Even now, talking about it, you still go deeper into thinking what it potentially could be.
Yeah,
But yeah, there's definitely tones of parental control.
Yeah, because that sort of blends into another reading that I'll be getting onto in a minute, which I came across, which I thought was probably one of the best readings I've ever seen, in that it fitted so well, birthing in the film. But just to sort of tie off the psychological reading, the final bit is the bit at the end where she's trying to shoot the doll, but you're hearing the click of the gun, which means there's no more bullets in the gun. Through a psychological framework, for me, that was sort of representative of that. You're stuck with it. You can't just fully break away from it and just be free of it. It's always there. It's always going to be a part of you, sort of thing.
Yeah, and that she can do nothing to...
Yeah, and I suppose to give it a religious sensibility, that would be almost like, in religious terms, original sin, in that once you have broken out of the veil of childhood, or enforced childhood, as it might be in this case, that you can't go back to that state.
Yeah. I think another thing it touches on as well, even from the parental control side of it, because it seemed to always be the dad that did it, which obviously with Ruth's situation, there was no father in the equation. I do think it's also trying to point a finger at the patriarchy as well, and that maybe men are often a bit of a problem when it comes to that. And another thing I read about was that it was about that. It was about how you see your father in a certain way until a certain time, and then that changes. So especially that girls see their father in that way, and see them as on a pedestal until they get to a certain age.
Yeah, because the final reading of it that I'll touch on, which was when I was mentioning, what I thought really sort of managed to get it all in place. And I'll just start by stating what I think the meaning of it is, and then I want to get your reaction on it, is that it is a satire of conservative panic around the punk movement.
Okay, I can see how, especially with Longlegs' sort of glam rock way of being, and it was definitely implied that, and also the music.
And when I was reading into it, this was the most fascinating one to me, because it actually plays quite well on so many different elements of the film in itself. In that, Longlegs is played in a way that's borderline comedic. Like, a lot of the lines he says and the way he says them, but it's only because of the context around those lines, and because Lee as a character is generally very, how do you word it? Very straight as a character, and everything's there's no outlandish elements to her as a character. And the world itself is presented in a very straightforward, grim way. That when you have Longlegs being this almost comical, larger than life character, like even the way it ends is kind of comical, in that it ends with a shot of Longlegs going "Hail Saint" and then smiling and cocking his head to one side and things like that. But and another element that ties into that, which might be a bit more autobiographical to the director and the writer, is that his father was an actor who is probably most famous for starring in Psycho, the Alfred Hitchcock film, and for also being a closeted gay man in the 50s, 60s times, and how after his relationship with a man was discovered, it was broken up, and several years later, he ended up going towards conversion therapy, and a lot of and at the time in America in the 60s, from like 60s through to the 80s, and to a lesser degree the 90s, homosexuals were classed as potential enemies of the state on the same degree as communists were. and the punk movement was heavily associated with all those things as well.
Yeah. And there would also be elements of that, of the religious aspects of that, and what that, and how religion is sometimes perceived to look at homosexuality. So, and if you were to be stereotypical and looking at Longlegs as a character, you would probably say that you would assume homosexuality by looking at him. So
a lot of the idea of it being a satire comes from how overblown he is as a character.
Yeah.
In portraying, and it's to the point where it's almost like the archetypal example of what, in American terms, the Christian right would see as someone who they would see as being an awful human being.
Yeah. So I can see it, because it has got those comic aspects at the same time as using those that comedy to also be extremely sinister at the same time. And like you say, it is context that makes that the case, because if he was just walking around being strange, like he was doing like the cuckoo thing and stuff like that, that would, yes, it would seem strange, but it wouldn't be quite as sinister than if you didn't know, what you already knew about him, and that's there's all of these children that are no longer alive.
And there's a line which I can't remember in its entirety, but it's in the bit where he's just been to that shop where the teenage girl who's on the counter ends up shouting to Dad, it's that weird guy again, or something like that, something on those lines.
Yes, and then that freaky guy that keeps basically being weird.
And he's in the car driving after that, and then as he's driving along, suddenly he screams out, "Mummy, Daddy," and it's something like, I can't remember exactly how it's framed, but it's something like, I want to be unmade, I want to not be alive. It's something along those lines, and how those lines themselves could be very heavily associated with someone who may have been a closeted homosexual and had gone through conversion therapy as a way of being seen, by trying to be seen as society as normal.
Well, I definitely read that bit, regardless, as that he'd had some trauma as a child or within his family at the very least anyway. So his family had definitely, so that's how I kind of read that. So I hadn't even thought about the homosexuality side of it or the conversion therapy, but that does make sense. But definitely it was definitely implying there was some kind of trauma that had happened to him around his family, and that was kind of them being passed on through what he was doing. So it definitely, because he refers to the person downstairs, and it's like, is that him, or is he referring to somebody who's further downstairs than him, as in Satan? It's unclear as to what that is. I mean, the letters themselves being written in that sort of runic language that he's using is quite telling of it being quite satanic as well, because they look very similar to sort of paganism, paganistic sort of languages that have been used many years ago. So I think it's the other thing as well that's interesting is, again, when you go back to the psychology side of it, Lee, her potential psychic ability, is it psychic ability, or is that talking, again, when you're looking at a PTSD situation, is that her having flashbacks? Is it her having false memories, that her memories are just flickering up, and that comes across to her as that she's being psychic, but actually it's not, because she's actually experienced these things, or her mum's spoken to her about them, or she's somehow experienced it or been part of it without realising.
So I can't remember if this is in the bit of her remembering or whether it's just something else that's shown, and it might even be before it's revealed to be a mother, but there's a scene where it shows a mother washing blood out of her top or something like that, and I can't remember where exactly it's placed, so I can't remember if it's in the aftermath of it. I
the scene. I just can't remember where it was.
Yeah, because I can't remember where that scene's placed, but I can remember that being there. And so, again, that would allude to what you were saying. And going back to the religion and Satanism dichotomy, and it being a kind of satire of that viewpoint, is that with each of the murders, it's all about letting a religious person into the house.
Yeah.
But one of the lines that I heard in someone use when discussing it, which I thought was a really good line, is that when you let God into your house, you also let Satan in as well. And so it's like that is the ultimate way of undermining the whole Christianity will save you from the devil, is that as soon as you accept Christianity, you also have to accept the idea of the devil.
Yeah, one begets the other. If you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, and so I just thought that was another bit that went into that way of framing, because that whole sort of, if you like, meta-textual film where it's not about the actual presentation itself, it's all about what it represents.
Yeah,
it's probably the hardest one to actually get your head around from just seeing it one time. It's you kind of have to have it explained to you, and things like, this means this means this, this means that.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
Yeah, because the interesting thing as well is the fact that she appears to just turn up at their house as well. It's not like she's really being invited. She's just turning up as a nun with a doll and saying, "This doll's for your child on their birthday, and it's a gift from the church."
Yeah.
So there's either it's assumed that maybe he picked people who were religious and already part of the church, and saw that as just part of what the church was doing. But then that shows an awful amount of trust that's put into the church, that someone just turns up and brings this doll into your house.
Yeah, and particularly over the last 30, 40 years, all of the varying scandals that have come out about various churches across the world. Again, it's and going back to the idea of childhood trauma, it's very heavily interconnected to those two.
Yeah, definitely. There's also from a symbolism perspective as well. Just to point out that I noticed it when she was having the flick through everything. The triangle situation is obviously the sign of femininity and fertility within religious.
Because when she's doing the Rorschach test, when that comes up, she says father, which is obviously the inversion of that because it's a very feminine symbol.
Yeah. So I think that was definitely purposely done because there's I think it's trying to make those points of gender.
Yeah.
So I think that the overarching thing with Longlegs is the fact that I think it's been purposely made to make you go, oh, it could be any of these things, and it be a talking point, and I think they've done a really, really good job at that.
Yeah. Yeah, because the thing that if someone was asking me about it, the thing that I would stress to them is that it's a very symbolic film, so try not to read it. Don't get caught up in reading it too literally, because that was a lot of people tend, from what I've seen of the reviews where it was more negative, is that they were thrown by the sort of psychological and the supernatural elements of it. Yeah. And so that's the thing I would stress to people, is that it is very much tapping into the idea of the supernatural being natural in a sense, and that symbols are alive and we interact with them just like anything that is real and solid.
Yeah. And I think people should, if they're watching it, should just go into it with an open mind and just don't think I need to know what this film means, because you might not know or might not. My idea of it has changed, and I'm sure yours has, throughout reading different people's reviews. And rather than reading them and gone, I've not really read one and gone, no, that's definitely not what it is. It's like, oh no, it could potentially be that. So I don't feel like I've taken a solid, this is what this film is about. I just think it's meant to be very much an open question, and I really like that because it's very rare that you get that with films. Although you might take something individually from it, there was definitely a clear intention, whereas there kind of wasn't with this. It was the opposite of what you usually get from a film. Yeah,
which explains why you might have, to a degree, you kind of have the negative, some of the more negative views towards it have been there, because particularly, this is what I mean, you've talked about a lot, is that there's very much an idea within the film/TV reviewing culture today that it must be this way and it can't be any other way. If it's outside of anything that I can't understand, then it's obviously bad or wrong, or it's not my fault, it's the fault of the film. or CBCs for not presenting it in the way I can understand it.
Yeah, and you definitely can't go into this film thinking that we can't do a, I don't know, like you say, we have spoken about many things to do with this, Doctor Who being one of them, where sort of it's not gone the way I expected it to, then I'm not happy with it, then you're not going to be happy with that film. If you need that structure and you need that ending, that very clear, this is what this was about, then Longlegs wouldn't be the right film for you. Whereas if you're okay with ambiguity and asking questions of something afterwards, and not having that, like I said at the beginning, it's got a clear storyline, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, but what those things mean are going to be very personal to each person, and I think that makes it quite a beautiful film as well as a horrifying film at the same time.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else that you want to say about it?
I think we've pretty much touched on everything that I could think of in regards to things that I was wanting to discuss with in regards to Longlegs.
Yeah.
How about you? Have you got anything else you feel like
the only one thing is, it hasn't really got an answer to it, and I'd love to see if I can find this answer, and it's just sort of like a question I want to leave open, as opposed to anybody, if people want to make comments on it, if they do think of anything to do with this. I know the reason why the 14th and around the 14th was used, as in to make the triangle so that it made it clear symbolically, but I haven't found anything that clearly says what the 14th could have meant, if it meant anything. So that's what I would be interested to see.
There's the implication within the film of the idea of once this final family is killed, it will complete the triangle, and therefore the devil will rise.
Yeah, but why the 14th of all dates? That's the thing. It was always within a few days of it, but why was it that all of the children's birthdays were on the 14th? That bit, I've not been able to find anything to know whether there's any kind of symbolism specifically to the 14th.
Yeah.
I'm hoping there is.
Yeah, because obviously if it was something like the 6th, then it would make a lot more sense because of obviously 666. But
yeah, or the other thing as well, the only thing I could think of is it's double 7, and when it was talking to the demon that came from the sea, that's in Revelation, there were 7 heads, but the 7 heads and 7 crowns, which maybe that's what it was referring to. 7 heads, 7 crowns, 14. Put the two together. But. Yeah, I think it was to an extent as well with the murders happening around about those dates to make the symbol happen. I think that was kind of trying to make a point of sometimes you really have to push things to create a symbol in life. If you want to find symbolism in something, sometimes you've really got to push it, because otherwise it'd have all been on the 14th. Yeah. But it was it was like they'd chosen a date and then pushed those dates to make it so that it fitted, which I thought was quite interesting, because that's what happens quite often. If you think that something's relevant, and the film number 23 does this, that you'll find any way of making that fit. So within number 23, I don't know whether you've seen number 23, but it's a film where the person is obsessed with the number 23 and thinks that it is controlling their life. It's actually Jim Carrey in a sort of thriller type film, which was quite interesting. But it's like adding. But what tends to happen with that is adding a number and dividing it and timesing it by this, and it eventually gets to 23, because you will always be able to find something, especially numerically, to fit if you use enough numbers to make it fit. Yeah. I mean, Countdown is pretty much, it does that. You can make pretty much any number out of what numbers are given to you. Yeah. So. But it'd be interesting to see whether there was a relevance specifically, or if anybody can see a relevance. I'd love to hear if anybody has any kind of theory on 14. Like you say, if it was 6, then you'd think that's what it was. But I can't find anything biblically that 14 means anything yet. I'm sure I'll keep looking and might be able to find something. But so that's our video on Longlegs.
Yeah.
So if you could, if you've enjoyed this, if you could like, subscribe, and share and comment. All of those algorithm good things. if I sound awkward when I say that, I always hate saying it because it sounds like I'm kind of being rude. But yeah, any sort of help would be great for us, because we've been away for a while. We are going to do a video separately to sort of talk about that, but this is the first video we've done in about 4 months, I think. So it would be great if we could have any support in those areas.